Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us for another webcast today. Today, we're going to be focusing on dailies and using Daylight to transcode and produce them. I'm Peter Postma. I'm Managing Director for FilmLight in the Americas, so I oversee our US and Americas operations out of Los Angeles. I also have a background in color science, and I've been working with Daylight and Baselight and the other products of FilmLight for quite a while now. So we need to put Daylight into context of where it is in our product line, because we are offering color solutions that work throughout your workflow, from when you shoot on set to your final finishing with Baselight. Of course, Baselight is our best known product. That's where this all kind of got started, is all the color tools and color science that we put into Baselight. We wanted to make available earlier in the production process. So if you start at the very beginning with pre-light, that would be used for live on-set production. So when you want to affect the color of the live feed out of the camera going to the monitor on set, that's what you would use pre-light for. So it can control a hardware box, a LUT box, or like an Aja or Blackmagic box to process the video signal and apply a basic color correction that you can see right there on set. Daylight can be used on set or near set. It can also be used in post-production, but that's what actually produces, takes the camera raw material and transcodes it into something that's useful for editorial. So it'll produce Avid files or ProRes QuickTime files. It can also be used for just basic playback, for reviewing camera raw footage, for doing transcodes to other things like digital cinema packages, and for doing VFX pulls. We also have Baselight plugins for Avid, Nuke, and Flame, which allow you to pre-visualize these color corrections in a VFX session or in an editorial session, and is very easy to send updates to Avid or Nuke or Flame so that those artists can always see the latest color correction, whether it was something that started in Daylight or is now being finished in Baselight. And then, of course, Baselight is our tool for final color finishing, for final color correction, for touching up the image, all that kind of thing. But today we're going to focus on Daylight and most importantly using it for dailies processing. Now, Daylight is available as a software-only product for Mac, and it will soon be available as software-only for Linux as well. So if you have your own hardware that can run CentOS 8 Linux, and it has a modern NVIDIA GPU in it, and we can give you a list of specific GPUs we've qualified, then that's a great way to build a machine that has a lot of horsepower for doing, debayer of large cameras, like the latest RED cameras or A65 cameras or that kinds of things. If you're just shooting with a camera that's recording ProRes or something like that, you could run it off a Mac laptop. That'd be fine. The Mac Pros or the iMac Pros are also great machines for running Daylight. The software and the feature set is the same no matter what hardware you run it on, so you can decide how much hardware performance you need for the job or the jobs that you're working on. You can also use render nodes, which are either Baselight, which can run either Baselight or Daylight projects on them. So if you have a show that's shooting a lot of footage and it's very high resolution camera raw material, you can offload a lot of that processing onto other Daylight machines or render nodes. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as we get into it. So I'm going to just hide my camera now so that we can focus on the Daylight software. And I thought I would take you through a project that's kind of already been started so you can see what the daily process looks like once you set up a project, and then we can go back and show you how the initial setup was done. So Daylight shares quite a bit with Baselight, not just in terms of the color engine under the hood, which is of course the same for all our products, but in terms of the user interface as well. The color tools will all look the same as they do in Baselight. A lot of the project management tools and all that kind of stuff are the same. The biggest difference is that Daylight doesn't have a timeline. So whereas Baselight is very timeline centric, you're bringing in an EDL and conforming your material on the timeline. Daylight is really just a bucket of shots that you're bringing in, and you need to, batch process, manage all the metadata, sync audio, and process into something else. So there's no timeline in Daylight. But we do use the same Postgres database for storing projects. So if I go to my current job I'm on here, you can see I've already set up, done the first days of dailies, and now we're going to do the second day of dailies. So if I go in here and right click on day one, I can do new scene using day one as a template. So this means it's going to preserve all my render settings, all my other kind of project settings, and just give me an empty bucket to bring in new shots. So I'll call this day two, and I now have that, that open. Now I'm going to go into Flux Manager, which is our file browsing tool. Now you can use Flux Manage to copy the footage from the raw, like camera media cards, onto your local system, whether that's local storage on the on your Daylight system, or SAN or other network storage. But it just does a very simple file copy. It doesn't automatically produce checksums. It doesn't do things like automatically copying to multiple sources if you need to, if you need to copy onto multiple hard drives or multiple LTO tapes all at once. So you stay tuned, as that's something we're looking at maybe adding to Daylight in the near future. But currently, if you needed that kind of copy tools, you'd use a third-party tool to do that. But then once you've got your image files on your system, you can just point Flux to them. And so I've downloaded all the files from today for this day's dailies into this folder called camera. And I've hit the descend button here. It'll basically show me everything that's in all these subfolders. So I don't have to drill down and like go into individual files and pull them all out. I just point them at the parent folder. And Daylight is very freeform in terms of how you structure files. So if you want to create different subfolders for different cameras, you can, but you don't have to. It's really entirely up to you how you organize it. Daylight is very flexible in accommodating how you prefer to store your files. So you can see I've got a bunch of files here. If I click on one, I can see all the metadata in the file as far as what type it is, the frame rate it has, what camera it was shot on, that sort of thing. There's one file in here that's like a phantom file mixed in with the red. That's all good. I can also switch to like a metadata view here, so I can sort or filter by any of this information. So like if I only wanted to process the phantom file right now, I could pull out just that one. Or if I only wanted to process the R3D files right now, I could pull out just those. Or I could sort by resolution or frame rate or any of that information if I needed to. But I'm just going to go ahead and do a Command A to select everything. There's 54 shots here, and I'll just say append. And it's going to ask me to set my container, which is basically just kind of the root folder where it's remembering all the footage is stored. So that if later this storage moves, say right now I'm just on a USB 3 drive, if later this footage is on a SAN and I need to be able to access it off a SAN, I could just change my container saying, well, so now instead of looking at the USB 3 drive, look at my SAN drive. And as long as the relative directory structure below that point is the same, it'll automatically find the file. So there's no complicated relinking or anything like that to do. It just remembers the file name and the path name to where you are. So I also set it up so that it automatically syncs the audio when it brought the video in. So if I look under my audio sync settings, I have it pointed at a folder where my audio is. And again, it's kind of freeform how you organize your audio. You just point it at the parent folder that has all your audio files in it. If I look in here, there's just a bunch of broadcast wave files in here. And I told it to automatically sync as it brought the images in. And it's syncing basically by looking at the time code that is in the wave file, the broadcast wave file, and the time code that is in the R3D files, and it matches them up. So if I can go ahead and open up my cursor window here, which controls kind of like my view settings, and I can enable a burn-in, which has audio timecode and video timecode. So you can see it's brought in the audio timecode and it exactly matches the video timecode. I've also set up a tab on here for no audio to quickly flag any shots that didn't have audio. And the only one that's in here is the phantom file, which is high-speed footage, which doesn't have any sync audio, so that's fine. So everything else, it automatically found audio for just based on the time codes. So now I can go and start checking to make sure that the metadata that's been brought in is correct and that all the audio is correct. One of the other options in this audio sync window was the ability to read the scene, take, and date metadata from the audio engineer. So if they were properly logging scene and take information when they were recording the audio, that metadata is automatically brought in when it finds a matching audio file. So I've already got scene and take information here for most of the clips. I'm going to sort by source timecode order, just so I can see the order that stuff was shot in on set and make sure it's coming in correctly. So I can check against the slate. Yep, you know, the marks are correct. Although this one is actually supposed to be take 2, not take 1. So I can just go in and, you know, correct that. And if, yeah, so I'm just checking kind of metadata for right now. If there's any missing slate information, I can jump to that and fill in the information for that shot as well. If you don't have any slate information, if the audio engineer wasn't recording it for you, or for some reason the audio is not syncing automatically, it's pretty easy. You can select all the takes of one sequence of shots. And if I fill in the scene and take information here, it'll prompt me to automatically renumber the shots I have selected. And I can pad it if I want it to be like, you know, 001 and 002 or whatever, or I can leave it unpadded, but it'll automatically now, with the shots I have selected, put in the right scene and take information. So I don't have to individually enter it for each shot. If I see, you know, a whole setup where they didn't get it right, it can quickly correct it and automatically number the take numbers. So now we can go to our audio sync view and double check that the audio did actually sync correctly. So if I go in, you'll see there's little blue marks on my kind of scrub bar down here. So again, if you're familiar with Baselight, you would expect to see its big timeline down at the bottom with a bunch of layers and stuff like that. In Daylight, we're just dealing with individual, you know, shots, the whole shots, no cut points or anything like that. So this whole scrub bar at the bottom is basically to scrub through my shot. And these blue marks are where it's detected sounds that look like slate claps. Now this particular footage is of them playing a poker game, and there's a lot of like chips being thrown around and cards being shuffled, which is somewhat similar to a slate clap. So it's especially challenging footage, right? There's a bunch of probably extra marks in here that aren't slate claps, but I can quickly just do Shift X, Shift Z to jump back to the next mark or the forward mark to make sure it's on mark. And right here I can see, so where it has the slate clap is obviously not correct. So in this case, there was a problem where they didn't sync the audio properly with the video, but we can check to see maybe they did at least correctly synchronize it with the slate, because my audio and video time card are not matching the slate. So I can switch from my audio sync view here from syncing based on source time code to syncing to a specific time code. So I could say 10, 15, 13, 16, just enter the current time code. And when I hit sync, so it will, yeah, sync the audio for this one shot based on basically the specific time code I've entered, matching where my cursor is currently on this shot. So now if I jump to where the slate mark is, you can see it's better, but it's still about a frame off. If I zoom in on my waveform view here, I can see there's the clap, but this is the frame that it actually claps on. And that's no problem. I can just move this sync mark back, and now it is right in sync there. I can do Command-Alt-Space, which will just review like a second before and a second after this clap, just so I can watch it play back and ensure it's in sync. For some of you, I know the webinar video can sometimes be a little bit laggy, so it may be hard to tell it's in sync, but on my machine, it definitely is. So if there's a consistent offset where the audio is out of sync with the video by a specific amount, I could just put in that offset here and have it resync the audio using that offset. In this case, there was some other problem where the audio kept drifting. So we can't depend on that. But again, we would just go in and I can hit Command-Shift-Y, which is the sync button, and it'll just bring up the time code. So I can type in 10, 17, 34, 10. And again, it'll research that audio directory to make sure that there is only one audio match, that there's not like multiple audio matches with the same time code, in which case you'd have to sort that out. If they shot like for more than 24 hours in one day, you could get overlapping time codes like that. Yeah, again, it's found it. If we jump to the mark where the clap is, we can see, again, it's just about a frame off, and I can use my keyboard shortcuts. So Command Shift forward or back just to nudge the audio forward or back and get it in sync. So as you can see, ideally, if your camera department and sound department are in sync with each other, the audio will just automatically come in, be in sync, and you won't have to do everything. But on cases where they didn't properly jam sync the camera, you have the tools to recover it and put stuff back in sync. So let's just say we've done that for all the shots we need to do it. We would now go on to color grading. So I can go to my my grading layout here. And again, this is where we'll start to look probably more familiar for those of you who are used to Baselight, apart from the lack of a timeline. I can now see all the thumbnails of all the shots that I have to grade. And I have my parameters for what is going into grading. So Daylight, like Baselight, does use layers for grading. So if I hit the P key, that will insert a color correction layer. And now I have all the controls where I can adjust the color correction. Now, if you have a tangent element panel or an Avid artist color panel, or the Slate, which is our own custom control panel with mappable buttons, you can use those with Daylight to have, you know, proper trackball control. For the webinar today, I'm just going to use the mouse so you can see how it works, you know, because you can't see me manipulating a control panel. But there is nothing in Daylight that you can't do with just a keyboard and mouse. So if you don't have a control panel, you can still do everything. You're not missing out on any functions. It's just a control panel helps you be faster and more precise, particularly when it comes to the grading part of things. But say I just need to, like, you know, let's jump to a frame that doesn't have the slate in it here. If I just want to adjust, you know, the exposure on this shot, I could bring up the exposure on it. If I want to adjust the color temperature, make it cooler or warmer, I could do that just by manipulating the trackballs here in the base grade. So now you can see I have one layer of color correction on this shot. There's a layer view over here, which shows me what layers I have, both on my reference, which is right now the same shot, and the shot I'm actively editing. Let's say I go to the next shot here. If I want to copy this grade over, I can just click on it once. That puts the dark blue square, which is my color reference, on the image I want to pull color from. And now I can just hit apply, and that will pull the grade across. I could also, like, you know, select a few shots if I wanted to, and drag and drop the grade onto them, and that will quickly apply the grade to multiple shots. Or just as like a base grade I want to do, I could just select everything, drag and drop, and it will apply that to, if I deselect the shot I'm currently on, that will apply it to all the shots that are on the timeline, just to get like an initial grade on there. Now, if you're working with a production that has someone applying color on set, you can also bring in those color corrections from set as your starting point. So say I had someone using PreLight, they would export a bunch of BLG files, and I can apply those in Daylight. And the nice thing about PreLight is that it sees the time code coming out of the camera, so, and it also sees the record flag, and if the camera provides it, it sees the clip name information. So it's able to keep track of what color grades are being applied to what shots throughout the day. So I actually get a whole folder full of BLG files. If I bring my Flux Manage window back open here, I have a folder where I've copied those BLG files that I've gotten from PreLight into. And if you look at them, there's a whole bunch of different BLG files here for every shot this day. A BLG file is actually just an OpenEXR file, so you can easily view it in any image viewer that can view EXR files, if you just want to get an idea of what the BLG file has in it. The top track, the kind of thumbnail track, has a split screen between the raw and the graded, but it can also switch to another track of the EXR file, which is just the graded, or I could look at just the linear raw files if I wanted to. Yeah, but in the header of that EXR file is all the Baselight grading information. So that will have all the settings of what they did on set with PreLight. And it will also have, as I said, the time codes and the clip names and all that to make sure that the right grade gets applied to the right shot. So if I wanted to bring in just an individual BLG file and apply it to a shot, I could double click on it here to bring it in from Flux Manage. But if I want to make sure I get it on all shots, what I'm actually going to use my multi-paste window. So if I go into Views Multi-Paste here, I can say I want to point it to a folder full of BLG files. And again, I'm pointing to the same FilmLight folder where I got all the BLG files from set. And I'm going to tell it to match by clip name and time code. So I'll select all the shots in my timeline and say, paste this into the timeline, overwriting what's there, matching based on this criteria. And it will tell me, yeah, it's found a bunch of unambiguous matches. So it found a specific match apart from, looks like 2 clips or so here, didn't have any grading settings on them. But it's brought in a bunch of color grades. You can see I now have the settings that they set for the base grade on set as I go through the different shots here with different settings. Now in my shots view, again, I've set up different tabs to filter. So I had one for the shots that have no audio. I also have one for the shots that don't have any grading. So if there were shots that didn't have any color grades, I could jump to those. Now I had previously applied a grade to all the shots, so they all have some grading on them. But yeah, if there were shots that hadn't been graded that needed attention, they would stand out in that tab, and I could quickly jump to those. If I wanted to bring in a more complex BLG file, say from post-production, that again wouldn't necessarily apply to anything shot on set because it was done in pre-production, I could bring in that with Flux Manage. So what I might do here is just delete the layer on here, so I'm back to no grade. Go into Flux Manage. I have a separate folder here, which is my BLG files from post, and they just sent me one sample file here. And this is a more complex grade. So again, it's the same color engine as Baselight, so all your color grading tools are available in Daylight. So they've got a base grading here, a hue shift, a key, which looks like it's keying on the side of the face there, change the skin face tone a little bit, a vignette shape, all that kind of stuff. So it's really great when a final colorist is involved in the dailies, so they can kind of set the expectation working with the DP and the director for what the final look of the piece is going to be, and have that inform dailies. It's not necessarily that you're going to do the skin keying and all this sort of stuff on every shot in dailies, but at least you can see fully what they're going for and get as close as possible and as is reasonable for dailies. So maybe, for instance, you don't have the time to go in and key all the skin tones and make sure that's all right from shot to shot. But they do want this vignette applied to all the shots, at least all the shots of this camera angle. So I can go back into my shots view. I'm going to sort by camera this time so that I get all the shots from the same camera kind of next to each other here. And I can select the first one and then shift select the last one so that I've got them all selected here. And I've already got like a base color balance on them, which I like. I just want to pull this vignette layer onto all those shots. So I've turned on group grading under the edit menu. There's a group grading option, which is just Command G. So when I hit that, all the red squares start blinking to indicate that the color operation I'm about to apply is going to apply to all the shots that I've selected. So when I click and drag the layer 4 onto a shot now, it'll apply just that vignette layer to all the shots. So you can see in the current layer view now, I've got that vignette copied onto all the shots. But the base layer 1 grade that was provided from set, which does the color balancing kind of shot to shot, that's all there untouched as well. So there's a lot of tools you have in here to be able to manage your color grade, copy your color grades from shot to shot, and quickly get everything graded as you need to for dailies. And as I said, all your color grading tools that you have in Baselight are available in Daylight as well. The main thing you can't do in Daylight is composite shots. So again, because Daylight is only working with one shot at a time, whereas on Baselight you could do a sky replacement where you're pulling a sky from one shot and a foreground from another shot and combining them, or replacing a screen or a billboard or something like that. You can't do that on Daylight, but you can do any color operation that you would do, including if it's keyframed or track. You can import tracking information or retrack a shape in Daylight. All those tools are there, just like they are in Baselight if you are a show that wants to take advantage of them. On the other extreme, some shows, to be as compatible with as possible with other workflow tools, want to limit color grading to CDL. And that's certainly an option we have in Daylight as well. If you want to limit yourself to CDL or even just use CDL as your primary grade, but then do a little bit of extra on top for those tools that can support them. So I could swap out my grading tool here with a CDL grade. And if I were doing a show this way, I would go under my customize menu up here and save this as a default config so that the CDL grade always comes up as default. And now I can grade with lift gamma gain. If I go to the video grade tab here in a CDL context, or if I prefer like film grade type grading with printer light exposure, I can adjust the CDL exposure there. And if I want to make sure I'm just doing CDL, I'll remove that base grade. So I'm just doing a CDL grade. You can also in here import a CDL from set. So if you have someone on set who's using a tool that's only generating CDL files, you can either import an individual CDL file. So if I go back to my CDL directories here, I have this one called Blue Look, which I can apply to the image. Oops, if I get onto the right image here, let's go ahead and change this to a CDL grade, import that Blue Look CDL. So now I've applied that to this image. If you have a whole collection of CDLs, again, with a tool like PreLight that can track the time code that the CDLs are being applied to, I can again use the multi-paste window, and instead of pointing it to BLG files, I can point it to CDL files or CCC XML file, which have multiple CDLs in it. And again, tell it what metadata to look at. So if it has just source time code, I could tell it to look at the source time code. If it has, tape name or file name information, or even if there's just like, scene and take information, I can have it match based on the scene and take information that's been logged. And as long as it's the same in the CDL file, it'll automatically import all the CDLs correctly for those shots. So let's say we've got everything good and color graded the way we want it. Now it's time to go to our render view to output all this stuff. So the main setup for rendering is over here on the left-hand side of my screen, and on the right-hand side of my screen is the render queue, because you can queue up multiple renders in Daylight. And rendering always happens as a background operation, so it doesn't tie up your machine when you start rendering. If you need to, you get a dump halfway through the day and you want to start rendering that stuff out, for Dailies, you can do that, and then in the foreground, be setting up, copying on and setting up the next set of footage that you've gotten. It will prioritize any work you're doing in the foreground, though, so it will take longer to render in the background if you're doing a lot of stuff in the foreground. The other option you have, as I said, is to offload this render to any other machine you have on your network. So if you have another Daylight machine or a render node or a flux store from FilmLight, you can offload the render onto that machine. And as long as it can see the same files, as long as it's the same network storage or whatever, it will be able to render entirely using the resources of that machine, freeing up your machine to prep the next footage. And the render queue here as well can monitor what's going on remote systems on your network, as well as what's going on in local systems, so you can keep track of your render jobs without having to move from your seat. In the main render window here, I've already got my deliverables set up. So I've got an Avid deliverable where it's rendering an MXF DNX115 with audio. I've got a deliverable for PIX where it's rendering an H.264 compressed QuickTime. We can also do ProRes QuickTimes, both on Linux and on Mac. So that's no problem. I've got a couple other tabs here for doing VFX pulls or creating a DCP. Those are disabled right now because I'm not doing a VFX pull. If I enabled one of them, you could see that, okay, now it's submitting 3 deliverables. So when you submit deliverables this way, it's rendering them as efficiently as possible. So in this case, where I'm rendering Avid MXF, H.264 QuickTime, and OpenEXRs for VFX, it will debayer the image once, color process it once, and then split it out to the different encodings that I have to do. So rather than reloading, redebarring, recoloring the file every time for multiple deliverables, it's doing it as efficiently as possible to do each operation only once, as long as you submit the deliverables all together like this. For right now, let's say I'm just going to do avid and pics. You can set out what resolution, of course, you're rendering to. If you need a burn-in, you can apply a burn-in. I have different burn-ins set up for pics than I do for avid, so that's all fine. And you can give it a name, and you can use basically any metadata from your source materials as the naming convention for the files. So I just have it set up here to use the clip name as the name for the files, and if I submit render, it'll deliver, start producing all the MXFs and the PIX H.264 QuickTimes. The other thing you'd have to do is potentially export some reports and metadata with this as well. So this is just for rendering out your image files. In the shots view down here, there's a little gear icon, and you'll see this gear icon a couple places in Baselight, which have additional functions for each area in them. So in the shots view, this is where I export additional metadata and information. So if I need to export an ALE file, that's actually hidden under the export EDL menu. We can just set our EDL format to ALE, and that will export an ALE with any extra columns of information and that sort of stuff that we need as an Avid log edit file for Avid. We could also export a PDF report if we need to. So I can open up my reports view here and see, like I've set up a title page of the summary. So we've got 200 gigs of files, almost 2 hours of footage. It gives me a summary by camera, how many shots, so 8 shots from camera A and B, 37 from camera T, and then a breakdown of what's in each shot. And this is, again, totally customizable. So I've actually set up a report view in my shots view here, which has the specific metadata fields that I want on this report. And I can enable or disable extra information. Like in this case, they wanted circle take, and that wasn't information that came in automatically with the audio, but maybe I got a paper camera report, so I could change the shots that I need to with circle takes. You can, of course, group select a bunch of shots and turn on group grading, change them all at once if you need to. And then that information will be reflected in the report. So that's flagged now which ones are circle takes if you need that sort of information. So yeah, any metadata that you can manage in the shots view can be part of the PDF reports you generate. And then, of course, you can generate multiple reports as well. If you need to export a report of shots that just don't have audio, you could set up a report for the no audio tab and do that as well. So that's pretty much what you need to do to get through a day's work with Daylight once a project has already been set up. Now I'll circle back a little bit and show you how to set up a project from scratch. So again, what I did last time was I right-clicked on this day 1 folder and did a new scene using that was a template. In this case, I'm just going to do a new scene from nothing. We'll call it day 2 brand new. Now, the main questions that it asks you when you create a new scene are what your frame rate is, resolution, and color space are. Frame rate is a really important one. You can only render to 1 frame rate at a time. So if you do have to deliver, like say, both 24 and both 30, you'd want to do those in separate timelines. Otherwise, Baselight will convert everything to that 1 working frame rate. For working format, that's not as critical because even though I'm working at HD and my source footage is maybe a mix of 4K and UHD and other things, if I deliver UHD, Baselight won't downsize it to HD and back up to UHD. It'll only resize the image once to go directly from 4K to UHD or from whatever my input is to my output is. So I don't have to worry about any kind of image loss, even if my working format is lower. The main thing the working format is used for is setting the sizing of an image. So if you need to line up with a camera chart, a lens chart to only look at a certain part of the image, that's all done in relationship to the aspect ratio of the working format. So I'll show you that in a second. So if we go back to our main player view here, you can see I now have an empty scene with nothing in it, and this is kind of all system defaults. I do find it's easiest to set up your template scene with some footage. So I'm just going to go back into Flux Manage here and bring in all this footage again. Again, hit descend so that it's grabbing everything in all these subfolders here. And I'll just do a select all and bring all that footage in. And it's just warning me that there was a timecode mismatch on one of the shots. That's the phantom camera, but that's fine. I actually wanted to play back at 24 frames per second. And oh, sorry. So it did import the audio settings because I had it set as a template scene. So we'll take just a second here to finish syncing the audio as well. So yeah, when we go into Job Manager, if I do, let me just close out of this scene. When I do a new scene, it actually remembered that I had used day one as a template last time. So I explicitly have to tell it, no, I don't want a template when I create a brand new scene from nothing. And now when I bring in the shots and change the container so that it remembers everything relative to my drive, I now have the shots in. And again, this is vanilla settings, so no audio syncing is being done, nothing like that. So the first thing we can see is that, yeah, the phantom camera footage here is a very different aspect ratio, is shot with an anamorphic, it looks like. So I want to set up a format to bring that in. If I look at my grading view, I can see on the layer 0 information what format this is coming in as. So it's 4096 by 1080, which is a format that we haven't told it explicitly how to handle. The other stuff is all UHD, which obviously resizes to HD quite nicely. But this first one, it's an unknown format, so it's just squishing it to fit in the frame. But if I want to do like a center extraction to fill my frame, I'll have to tell it to do that using formats. So I'll hit convert basic format here, which allows me to explicitly name this format, so I can tell it how by default it should handle formatting of this type of media. So now that I've got an officially named format for it, I can go under Daylight Formats and select that format and tell it how I want to map it to HD. So I could do a new mapping to my working format, which is 1920-1080, and I want it to be a center extraction. And you can, of course, do custom camera mappings based on the camera chart and stuff like that to line it up exactly as you need to for each footage. So this will now be the default way that any footage that comes in this way is handled. So if a new phantom camera footage comes in tomorrow, it'll use, as long as I'm using this scene as a template, it will use this same formatting to bring that footage in automatically. You can do individual transforms on a shot if you need to do a specific resizing just for one shot. This formats menu is really for setting up the default way that any new image resolution, any new format is handled. So that you don't have to really think about it once it's all set up. It just brings it in correctly for each shot. The other thing I notice about this phantom material is that there's no tape or clip name that's come in with it. There's no metadata that this phantom camera is providing as far as anything other than the basic time code, really. So I'll have to. One way I can deal with that is, I could of course manually edit this in if it's just one shot, but if I want it to be handled automatically, I can set up what's called a media import rule. And this allows you to really trigger any kind of automatic handling of metadata or shot settings for different types of media. Based on any kind of criteria that you want to match to. So I'm going to set up a criteria for media type of phantom camera. So that's basically every phantom camera file that's brought into this project will be given this treatment. I may tell it that I want to map the clip name, getting it from some other bit of metadata, and I know the shortcut for file name is %D. So this is going to put the file name into the clip name. If you look in the little text that help here, this little question mark, which tells you all the variables you can use for what field to pull in. But here I'm going to set the text to clip name, and I'm going to do the same text as the tape name. So now whenever Cine files are brought into this project file, it will apply this mapping. If I want to test it out, I can say apply it to all shots right now. And you can see it's automatically added in a tape name and clip name information using the file name as the tape name and the clip name. There's all sorts of other stuff you can do. You can do multiple rules here. So I could call this as like my phantom rule. If I wanted to do something specific to the R3D footage, I could set my media type to R3D movie. And then I could do anything like set default decode parameters for how the debear settings are set, what color space is assigned to footage when it gets brought in, or of course any of the metadata mapping as well for populating the tape name field, the clip name field, or comments, or whatever it is you need to do. So this media import rule is really powerful for kind of automating that stuff you need to do when you bring in shots every day. So the other thing you saw me using in the project was different tabs in my shots view. A default project comes with a few, like there's already one for showing you shots which are graded. In my case, I'm more interested in ones which are ungraded, so I'll change that to ungraded and change the name on it here. There's also one called current tape, which is useful if you have a bunch of shots with the same tape name. It will find any other shots with the same tape name. That's not particularly useful for this type of media where every shot has a unique tape name. But I could change this to say, if I was interested in other shots shot on the same camera, I could change this to camera is the same as the current shot. So I'll just rename this to current camera. And now I have a filter here, which just shows me everything that's on this T-cam. If I go back and choose on my All Shots tab, choose a B camera shot, it'll now show me all the shots that were from B camera. So that could be a handy filter to have. And then I'd also created a new tab here for audio, and set a filter here for has audio set to no, and it'll show me any shots that don't have audio. Now you see, even though I didn't do any sound syncing on this particular project that I've opened, there's only a few shots that don't have audio. That's because there's actually audio associated with the camera original R3D files. So this has audio flag, will flag any audio, whether it was sunk from an outside source or associated with the raw camera files. So if you needed to check, where the audio was coming from, back on this All Shots tab here, I could add in an audio path field, which will show me, where the audio is being pulled from. And I still actually have my other projects open in here, my old Day 2 one. So if we look at the All Shots tab on here, you can see I have an audio path where it has the individual wave files that it's brought in when it's done the sound syncing. Whereas this project, where I hadn't done sound syncing yet, is just pulling from the R3D files. So that's just one thing to be aware of with the audio file, no audio filter. I could also set up my audio sync settings so that when things come in, again, I can point it at the folder where my audio is going to be living. And of course, this could change day to day too. I just have to point it at a new folder when I have a new days of audio to point it at. It'll automatically drill down through subdirectories to read everything. It is important you set the audio frame rates because if you try to sync 2398 footage at 24 or vice versa, the sound will drift over time. So you have to be careful if that's set right. I could tell that I do want to import scene intake and date information from the audio engineer if it's done. And if I wanted to auto sync anytime it brings in footage, I could set that too, or I could disable that and just explicitly sync after I've brought in footage, however you prefer to work. One setting I do recommend when you are syncing audio in Daylight as well is under this little speaker icon here, turn on playback during scrub. And that makes sure that anytime you're just scrubbing over the timeline or inching through, it's playing the audio for you as well. So that really helps to make sure things are in sync. Another preference that's nice to know about for audio is under your main system preferences here. If I just search for review, there's a function that will, again, just kind of allow you to quickly check the sync by playing a few seconds before and a few seconds after the current cursor. So say you're sitting on a slate, it'll play back a second or two before and after the slate. The shortcut for that is just Command Alt Spacebar. And here is where you can set how long that review is. So I think by default it's actually 2 seconds of lead-in time before and after the current cursor to check sync. I lowered that to 1 second because that's all I needed to check and make sure things were in sync. So the other thing in Shots View is we can set up our reports. So the first time you create a report, you'll have to open up the reports view and create a new one. And then again, you have a whole bunch of fields here which you can customize, what the title of the report is. So this is, webinar of the movie. We can add whatever additional information, like kind of summary information we want for here. Again, we're using this kind of variable substitution where any metadata field from the project can be added in here. You can also look in your metadata column settings. There's a little help text here which will show you all the different types of variables and more sophisticated things you can do to pull in information into this report. But then the main view, which has the thumbnails and all that sort of stuff, that will just be based on whatever tab you set up. So if I, again, had the no audio tab and I wanted to show, do a report just for when there's no audio, I can title my report that. And then I would go in here and customize that no audio tab with just the information that needs to be in the report. So I'm not so much worried about, the file name and stuff like that, but I do want the audio. There's no audio, so I don't need audio path. I do want scene and take information. So yeah, that's all I need in my report. And now when I export my report, it'll only have those fields which I've enabled in this no audio tab of my view here. You can also set up your export settings for like ALEs or EDLs if you need to export EDLs. All that can be set up, and this is part of the template kind of settings that will get copied over when you create a new scene. You can also set up your burn-ins. If I bring up my cursor view, that's again the kind of controlling my viewing settings of the timeline. So I can add, there's a default data dailies and film dailies burn-in. Daylight can still handle film dailies. So if you actually have to be working on a project that's shot film, but need to still be able to deliver everything to editorial and digital review playback systems in the studio and everything else, we can handle the key code and the sound syncing and all that stuff for film as well. Or I could create a new burn-in. And if I just right click on the screen here, you can see again all the metadata information that can be added in. So if I want like the shot clip name, I can just drag that around, resize it, put a rectangle behind it if I want. And you can do further customization if you want to. I can add scene and take information if it's present, and I can organize this, however I want. If you want more kind of precise control over things, all this is actually also set up in the formats menu as well. I have this new burn-in that I've created, so if I really needed to change like the font opacity or the font that's being used, I can change all that here in the formats window. You can also add in, images for logo burn-ins and things like that, all in these burn-in settings here. And then lastly, we would go to our render settings and set up our renders. You can set up global presets that can be easily imported. So I actually saved a delivery set called webinar here, which I can pull in, and that has all my settings here from the previous job that I set up. So you can always create new presets or save these, and these are global no matter what project you're in. So when you create a template scene in Baselight or use a scene as a template, it'll just have whatever tabs were enabled on that project. But you can also, again, save these presets where available anywhere in the application. I can, delete, if I'm not going to be doing any DCPs with this project, I delete that or add a new copy if I wanted to. Some other deliverable, let's say we wanted to do ProRes files. We could set that up. Across the top here, I would just say I'm doing a movie file with audio, and then it's going to be a QuickTime movie that's ProRes 422. I could set the audio codec, whatever other settings I need to burn in, masks, things like that. So if I needed to do that test burn-in we did, and then only flash it for the first 5 frames, or burn into everything, or just flash the first frame, all those kind of customization settings you have available for controlling your burn-ins and controlling your render, basically. So that's, pretty much the basics of setting up a scene in Daylight. The other thing that would come across with a template is anything you have in scene settings as far as what your color pipeline is for Daylight, how it's all being handled. This is a topic that's covered very well in some of our other videos, so if you're not familiar with how Daylight and Baselight and all our products really handle color management, I definitely recommend checking out some of those color workflows. But the quick summary is that we have this tool called Color Space Journey, which will tell you exactly what color transforms are going on for a shot. So this setting is set up by default to use our own TrueLight Cam display rendering transform. So it's basically what is making the image look nice on the monitor before I even do any grading. If I was doing, say, an ACES workflow, I could change that to ACES, or if I wanted like, Red's default look or Aries default look, I could change that color space and scene settings. So that's just kind of the default look that comes up, which is set in scene settings here. And the working color space is just if you're doing like a film grade or a CDL grade, what color space that's being applied in, so that you can apply that in ACES space or red space or anything like that. It is worth mentioning, if I go to my grading view, you do, of course, have control of all the raw parameters whenever you bring in a camera raw file. And what parameters you have will be dependent on the camera manufacturer. So Arri has their own set of raw parameters for debarring. Sony has their own set, Panasonic, and Red, of course, has theirs. By default, when the color management is set to automatic, Baselight will basically only allow you, or only imports the metadata for ISO and color temperature, because those are the things that are kind of really critical in the way they affect the actual debar process. Any additional like lift, gamma, gain, creative tools, stuff like that are all disabled by default because it's presuming you're going to use Baselight tools to apply those. So whether that's just with a simple CDL grade or a more sophisticated base grade, particularly with the more sophisticated color grading, you want to disable the kind of creative grading done on the raw camera and manage it all with the creative layers in Baselight. So before we go to Q&A, there's one other thing I wanted to show you using Daylight for doing VFX pulls. So I'm just going to go back to my shots view here. Actually, one other nice shortcut I'll show you is that you can quickly switch between different tabs just by doing Control Tab on Mac. So I can quickly jump, without even having the shots view open here, I can quickly jump back to my all shots view. Or to a no filtering view if I need to. But I'm going to do a select all and delete all the stuff from this scene, just so I have a blank scene so I can show you what a VFX pull looks like. So we have an EDL import view here to bring in like an ALE file or a CMX EDL file. So I just browse to this VFX ALE file that someone created for me. And now I'm connected to the Flux store here at the Baselight office. So we have a small Flux store here called New, if I point to it here, which has just got, it's about 80 terabytes of information on it. So it's a huge number of files that are on here. But I have an index service running, which is basically pre-indexed all the footage for me. So I'm going to run a VFX pull against this storage volume, which has thousands and thousands of images and stuff in it, but it's only going to take me a few seconds. So again, I'm just going to tell it here to make sure I'm using the indexing that it's done on the metadata of all the files in this storage. And I'm going to point it at the root folder for Muse. So this is the root 80 terabyte storage volume. And I'm going to tell it to look and match the ALE to the tape name of the file. So if I hit start conform here, it's going to go through and try to find these files in the VFX pull. So it's very quickly able to look at over 17,000 movie files, over 9,000 DPX and OpenEXR sequences, and pull in these images for me. It says I found 100% match with no ambiguity. So if it's done on here, you can see these are the files that were pulled for VFX down here. And yeah, it can be done very quickly because it's all pre-indexed. Now, if you have a Baselight or a Flux store, you can turn on that indexing so it's done automatically. And anytime a new bit of media is added to this Flux store, it'll automatically be a part of that index. If you have a large SAN or some other kind of network storage, you can also purchase a small server which will proactively index your storage media. So even if you have more than a petabyte of image media scattered across all kinds of different folders, and you need to do a VFX pull or even just an editorial conform against that footage, you can do it virtually instantaneously, just as fast as I did it here against a petabyte, because it's all pre-indexed. So when it's that separate index server running, it is going ahead and constantly checking for new media. So sometimes it may take a minute before it gets added to the index. But if you're talking about a project where you're just adding terabytes of footage onto it every day of a shoot, but then you need to do a VFX pull against it. It makes it virtually instantaneous to do those pulls. So that's a really useful tool that we get on with Daylight. And also you can use our API, which again, some of our other webinars talk about in depth if you want to learn about our API, but that allows you to use JavaScript or Python programming to automate a lot of the tasks you do with Daylight or with Baselight. So yeah, if you have a more kind of set workflow or you want to create your own web portal for doing VFX pulls, you can do that with just a few lines of JavaScript or Python leveraging our API to do that. So that's what I had planned for the presentation today. I'll go ahead and turn my camera back on here and see if there are some questions we can address, if you have some questions. So the first one here is just, can we output on the output monitor? Yes, so for the purposes of the webinar, I have the image and the UI all on one screen. Typically in a daily situation, you would have an Aja box or a Blackmagic box providing SDI output. So then your UI is all on your computer monitor and your image is on your dedicated SDI output. So that's definitely the recommended, the typical setup would work. Another question here is just about availability of Daylight and how much it costs. So there's a free trial of Daylight available on our website. So you can go to the web store now and download that if you'd like to. And you can also order it directly from the website. That's for the Mac software version. And it's a subscription price. So if you only need it for like 3 months to get through a feature project or something like that, you can subscribe to it for a shorter amount of time. If you want to buy it or subscribe to it for a year, that's an option as well. If you're interested in the Linux version of Daylight, you can contact your sales rep. That's not quite ready yet, but it will be soon. So if you want to get ready for that and make sure you have the right hardware and things like that, definitely get in touch with us. Another question here, is HDE ARRI RAW supported in Daylight? Yes, it is. We were one of the first applications to support the compressed ARRI RAW files. And that's something we work hard on both for Daylight and for Baselight, is being able to natively support as many camera raw file formats as possible, certainly from all the major camera vendors, but also some of the smaller ones, because the idea is that, yeah, any footage you bring in, you should be able to process right away in Daylight or Baselight. And we're constantly doing updates to keep on top of that stuff. So you'll see pretty regularly, at least monthly updates of Baselight and Daylight, and a lot of that is to accommodate new camera SDKs or new camera formats and little bug fixes and things like that. And the other question here was just about the difference in performance times. It's not significantly slower or faster from what I've seen with the HDE ARRI RAW. It really depends on where your bottleneck for rendering is. So the two main performance bottlenecks in Baselight are going to be your storage I/O, how fast you're able to read and write to storage, and then how fast you can do image processing. So all the color processing in Daylight is done on the GPU. All the debayering and things like that are done on the GPU, but some compression and decompression has to be done on the CPU, because not all compression types are GPU accelerated. So yeah, in the case of like HDE ARRI RAW, that would eliminate a storage bottleneck if that was your bottleneck with ARRI RAW. So it would probably move the bottleneck onto the GPU. If you're already hitting a GPU bottleneck in terms of how fast you can debayer like Area 65 material, things like that, then the HDE ARRI RAW is not going to have a significant impact on render time, but it would slow it down a little bit because now it has to also decompress before it debayers the files. But yeah, performance is really a constantly moving target. I definitely recommend always testing whenever possible if you're really concerned about, okay, how much footage am I going to get through a day? With new camera formats constantly coming out, with new GPUs constantly coming out, those numbers are always changing. So it's always good to test your workflow and verify on your hardware how fast the throughput you're getting, and definitely get in touch with us if you're not happy with the performance, because we could recommend different GPU configurations for you or different hardware that would get you through that project quicker. Next question is, can we open up a project made in FilmLight on Daylight and link with raw files? So FilmLight only works on one image, one frame at a time. So even though FilmLight basically works by controlling another hardware box that's actually applying the color correction in real time. So it'd be basically a LUT box that is downloading a 3D LUT onto. or like in Azure or Blackmagic IO, where it will actually be ingesting the audio, quickly rendering it and putting it right back out the SDI. But as far as what you see on the screen, it's really only one image at a time, and it's meant to work on one shot at a time. So the project format is different between Prelight and Daylight, and the link between the two is the BLG files. So at the end of a day with Prelight, you export all your BLG files, and that's what you import into Daylight. But Daylight project files are compatible with Baselight. So you can, if you've done all your dailies in Daylight and now you're moving to Baselight for your finishing, you can open up those projects in Baselight. And as I said, you could also open them up from a multi-paste window to automatically make sure that the right grades get applied to the right shots. Just another quick question or two here. Is the eGPU supported for Daylight on Mac? No, we don't currently support the eGPU. It's something we've looked at. The performance has not been great on it, so we haven't spent the time to kind of make it work. The eGPU is that external GPU you can have with a Mac laptop. But as I said, the Mac Pros or the iMac Pros do actually have pretty good performance if you're working on a Mac. Another quick question here is, how do you export an ALE for Avid? So I went over that in the presentation. That's under the shots view here. It's hidden because it's under the export EDL menu. But if you export EDL and set the format to ALE, that'll actually be a proper Avid log edit file for Avid. And then another question here, just about, does Daylight have all the same layer operators as Baselight? So again, yes, it does have all the same color operators. It just doesn't have the same compositing operators. So you can't composite more than one layer. Daylight also does not currently support OpenFX plugins, but that'll be coming in a future version. Last question here is, can you do subframe audio syncing? And yes, you can. So if we look at our audio sync view, I have it set right now. If I just go back to my project with audio, that when I jump in audio, it's jumping in full frames. But you can actually change that setting if you want to subframes. So under my preferences here, it's the nudge size here for audio. The default is actually a quarter of a frame. So now if I nudge it, it's doing it in quarter frame increments, but you can set that to whatever number you want. And of course, you can insert like a totally arbitrary number in here if you want to, or you can actually hold down the control key and drag. Oops, sorry, the command key and drag, and that'll do a custom amount of adjustment, so you can get a really precise audio match if you want to. The one caveat with this is that the ALE files only export whole frame numbers, or Avid only imports whole frame numbers. So if you're going to be using the ALE to kind of import the video and audio into Avid, it will only import on whole frame numbers. It won't get the fractional frame. But if you're using another method, if you're just using the rendered video and audio that come out of Daylight, then that will have that subframe accuracy. So that's my presentation for today. Thank you very much for joining me. If you are a French speaker or happen to know a French speaker, we're doing another Daylight webinar next Thursday, June 25th, in French. And I do actually recommend, even if you've seen my presentation, to go check out that one, because they have a colorist and a DIT who've used Daylight extensively. And they're going to be talking more about how they've used it on some of their projects, and also more about how they've used the API to link Daylight to a daily system for reviewing dailies, and how easy that was using the FilmLight API. So I hope you can join us then, and thank you again.